The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria gleamed under the golden chandeliers, a temple of wealth and power in the heart of New York City. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities, and socialites mingled, their laughter blending with the notes of a string quartet. Waiters glided through the sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns, offering champagne on silver trays. To outsiders, it looked like a flawless evening, the perfect charity gala. But beneath the polished surface, a storm was brewing, one that would shake everyone in that room. At the far corner of the ballroom, Sophia Miller stood alone, her hand gently resting on her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant, her body carried both the fragility of exhaustion and the quiet strength of a mother determined to protect her unborn child. Her dress was simple, modest, and 2 seasons old. A soft lavender gown she had altered herself to fit her changing body. Against the backdrop of dazzling couture and diamond necklaces, she looked almost invisible. Invisible. That's what her husband wanted her to be. David Miller, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world, stood at the center of a laughing crowd. In his hand, a glass of vintage Bordeaux. At his side, clinging to his arm like an ornament, was Vanessa Cruz, the mistress, the woman everyone in the room whispered about but never confronted. She was 26, ambitious, with long black hair and a dress so tight it looked painted on. While David's wife stood off in the shadows, Vanessa basked in the spotlight, her laughter loud and grating. Sophia felt her chest tighten. She wasn't just humiliated, she was suffocating. The world she had once believed was built on love and partnership had turned into a theater of cruelty. Tonight, that cruelty would erupt in a way no one could ignore. The moment came quickly, almost too quickly. A waiter brushed past Sophia, and her hand trembled. The glass of red wine she carried slipped just slightly, splashing across the pristine white sleeve of David's Tom Ford suit. The room went silent. David froze, then slowly turned his head toward her. His face darkened, lips tightening into a sneer. "You stupid woman," he hissed, his voice sharp enough to cut the air. Gasps rippled through the nearby guests, but no one dared intervene. Sophia's heart raced. I'm sorry," she whispered, clutching her belly protectively. Sorry wasn't enough. In a flash of rage, David grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her toward the center of the ballroom. The quartet stopped playing. Glasses clinked nervously as people stepped aside, unsure whether to stop him or stay silent. Power and money had a way of silencing even the most righteous voices. Then it happened. David shoved Sophia to her knees, ripped the decorative whip from the gala's auction display, a leather piece meant as a collector's item, and raised it high above his head. The first lash cracked against her back. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Sophia cried out, her body arching in pain as she shielded her stomach with trembling arms. The second lash came harder, and then another. Each strike was a public declaration, a savage reminder of his control. Countless eyes stared, some horrified, some frozen, some pretending to look away, but the strikes continued. 10 lashes, 20, 50. The number climbed, and Sophia's body shook under the relentless blows. Her vision blurred with tears. Every muscle screamed in agony, but her mind clung desperately to one thought. The baby. Protect the baby. At around 100 lashes, whispers grew among the guests. Is he insane? She's pregnant. Someone stop him. Yet no one moved. No one wanted to challenge David Miller, the rising investment mogul who had built a reputation on ruthlessness. Vanessa stood smugly nearby, her painted lips curling into a smile. She leaned toward another woman and whispered loud enough for Sophia to hear. Pathetic, she can't even hold a glass. Sophia's body trembled. The humiliation was worse than the pain. She felt stripped of dignity, treated not as a wife, not even as a human being, but as a spectacle. 200 lashes, 250. The whip tore through the air, each strike leaving welts across her back, each moment searing itself into her memory. Her sobs filled the room, but David's fury drowned them out. When the whip cracked for the 300th time, the room held its breath. Sophia collapsed onto the marble floor, her cheek pressed against the cold stone, her arms wrapped instinctively around her belly, whispering a silent prayer that her child would survive what her body could barely endure. David stood over her, panting, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of cruelty. He tossed the whip aside and sneered, "That's what happens when you embarrass me in public." Silence. And then, from the shadows near the stage, a figure stepped forward, tall, commanding. His presence shifted the energy of the room instantly. The whispers grew louder as recognition rippled through the crowd. Ethan Blackwood, billionaire financier, a man whose power stretched across continents, whose name alone could topple careers. His eyes locked on David, cold and unyielding. Then, slowly, they softened as he turned to Sophia, broken, trembling, yet still clutching her belly with the instinctive strength of a mother. The room held its breath. "Enough," Ethan's voice thundered, low and dangerous. "Touch her again, and you'll answer to me." Before the night of the gala, before the whip cracked across her back 300 times, Sophia Miller had been just another woman lost in the vastness of New York City. To strangers, she seemed ordinary. A nurse who wore faded scrubs, tied her hair into a messy bun, and rushed between shifts at St. Mary's Community Hospital. But behind her quiet smile lived years of sacrifice, loneliness, and a love story that had rotted from the inside. Sophia was born in a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Her parents weren't wealthy, but they were proud, hard-working people who instilled in her one lesson above all: treat others with kindness, even when life isn't kind to you. For years, Sophia carried that belief like a torch. It carried her through nursing school, through the endless nights studying with coffee-stained textbooks, and through the long days when she took double shifts to send money back home after her father fell ill. That was when she met David Miller. David had seemed like a dream, confident, charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and command every eye. Sophia had been 23, still starry-eyed, still believing in fairy tales. David pursued her with flowers, candlelit dinners, and promises of a future filled with comfort and security. "I'll take care of you, Sophia," he had said one evening, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You'll never have to struggle again." She believed him. Their wedding had been small, just family and a few friends. Sophia wore a simple lace dress her mother sewed, and when David slipped the ring onto her finger, she truly thought she was stepping into forever. For a while, it seemed she had. David landed a lucrative job in finance, their apartment grew larger, their dinners more expensive. He bought her gifts, handbags, jewelry, vacations to Miami. At first, she felt like a princess, but slowly, the shine wore off. David began criticizing her clothes. "Why do you always dress so plain? You make me look bad when we go out." He mocked her work. "A nurse? You wipe noses for a living while I build empires. Pathetic." At first, Sophia laughed it off, thinking he was just stressed. But the comments sharpened into knives. Soon he controlled what she wore, who she talked to, even when she could call her own mother. The pregnancy changed everything. And yet, nothing at all. When Sophia learned she was expecting, she was 7 weeks along. She had sat in the tiny bathroom of their apartment, staring at the 2 pink lines trembling in her hand. Her heart raced with joy, fear, and hope all tangled together. She pictured a nursery, little socks, bedtime stories. She imagined David's eyes softening when she told him the news. Instead, his first reaction had been silence, then a smirk. "A baby? Great. Just what I need. Another mouth to feed." Sophia's stomach dropped, but she pushed the hurt aside. She told herself he was just shocked. She convinced herself he would come around, and sometimes he did, touching her belly absent-mindedly, asking if she needed anything. But those moments were rare. More often, he used her pregnancy as ammunition. "You're fat, you're slow, you're useless. What good is a wife who can't even walk up the stairs without panting?" Still, Sophia endured. Because she had been raised to believe in marriage, to believe in loyalty, because she wanted her child to have a father, because somewhere deep down, she still remembered the man who once bought her daisies and whispered about forever. But by 7 months, the hope had dried up. David came home late, reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. He texted constantly, smiling at his phone while Sophia sat on the couch, rubbing her swollen ankles. She didn't need to ask who it was. Vanessa Cruz, the young, glamorous woman from his office, the one who had started showing up at parties on his arm, under the excuse of networking. Sophia knew. She saw the way Vanessa looked at him like he was the prize she had won. She saw the way David puffed up his chest when she was near. It was betrayal painted in neon, impossible to ignore. And yet, Sophia stayed. Why? because she had no money of her own. David had cut her off from the bank accounts, insisting that a wife doesn't need access to finances. Her nursing shifts barely covered groceries. She was too pregnant to leave, too dependent to fight back. She prayed each night that David would soften, that the baby's arrival might change him. But deep down, she knew. She knew the man she had married no longer existed. All that remained was a cruel stranger wearing her husband's face. The night of the gala had been her breaking point. Sophia hadn't even wanted to attend. She begged David to let her stay home, her body aching, her ankles swollen. But he sneered, "You'll come, you'll smile, you'll make me look good." He shoved a dress at her and told her to put it on. And so, like a dutiful wife, she went. She walked into that glittering ballroom, knowing she didn't belong. The diamonds, the couture, the cold stares of women who whispered behind jeweled hands. It was another world. She clutched her glass of wine only to blend in, even though she barely sipped it. She kept her head down, tried not to notice Vanessa's mocking gaze, or the way David paraded her like a trophy. And then the accident happened. The spilled wine. The fury. The whip. As Sophia lay broken on the marble floor, she realized something with a sharp clarity. This wasn't love. It had never been love. She was nothing more than a possession, and possessions could be destroyed. But destiny had other plans. Because just as the whip fell silent and her body shook with pain, a man she barely knew, a man powerful enough to silence an entire city, stepped forward. Ethan Blackwood, his gaze locked on hers, not pitying, not dismissive, steady, strong, the kind of gaze that said, "You are not invisible. You are not alone." Sophia's heart pounded. For the first time in years, she felt the tiniest flicker of hope. What she didn't know was that Ethan wasn't just another guest. He had been waiting for this moment, waiting to reveal a truth that would change her life forever. The gala was supposed to be a night of charity, a celebration of generosity and goodwill. But for Sophia Miller, it was a gilded cage, every glittering surface reflecting back her own misery. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom stretched wider than a football field, its ceiling painted with frescoes of angels and gods, glowing in the golden light of crystal chandeliers. Each chandelier sparkled like a frozen constellation, dripping diamonds of glass that scattered light across the polished marble floor. At every table sat the city's elite, bankers, real estate tycoons, Hollywood stars, and politicians with practiced smiles. They sipped champagne worth more than a nurse's monthly paycheck and tossed their heads back in laughter that never reached their eyes. The room was perfumed with wealth. Designer gowns shimmered in every shade of the rainbow. Emerald satin, ruby sequins, sapphire chiffon. Men strutted in tailored tuxedos, cufflinks flashing as they gestured dramatically in conversations about mergers and acquisitions. Photographers lined the entrance, their cameras flashing as if each guest were royalty. At the far end, a silent auction displayed artifacts of obscene luxury: a diamond-studded watch, a vintage sports car, a trip to Monaco aboard a private yacht. Everything screamed excess. Everything screamed status. And into this ocean of extravagance walked Sophia Miller. Her lavender gown, modest, slightly wrinkled from her attempt to iron it at home, looked painfully out of place. She had bought it 2 years earlier at a discount store, long before her belly swelled with the life inside her. Tonight, it was the only dress she owned that still fit. Her shoes were scuffed, her hair pulled back into a simple bun. She clutched her small handbag like a lifeline, her free hand resting on her 7-month pregnant stomach. She might as well have been invisible. Or worse, she might as well have been a target. The women at the tables glanced at her with condescending eyes, their whispers sharp and slicing. Who invited her? She looks exhausted. 7 months pregnant at a gala. How tacky. Sophia lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning. She told herself to breathe, to focus only on surviving the night. But her husband had other plans. David Miller loved these events. The flashing lights, the endless compliments, the way people fawned over his ambition. He lived for the performance, for the illusion of perfection. Tonight, he wore a sleek Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his posture radiating confidence. But beside him, like a poisonous shadow, stood Vanessa Cruz. Vanessa was the embodiment of everything Sophia wasn't: youthful, glamorous, unapologetically bold. Her crimson gown hugged every curve, plunging dangerously low in the front. Diamonds glittered at her neck. Gifts no doubt purchased with money David claimed he never had for Sophia. Her laughter rang through the air like a bell, high-pitched and piercing, drawing every eye in the room. David paraded her like a prize stallion, whispering into her ear, brushing her arm, offering her drinks, all in full view of his pregnant wife. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation delivered with a smirk. Sophia stood near the back of the ballroom, trying to disappear into the shadows. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering silently to the life inside her, "It's okay, baby. Just a few more hours, we'll get through this." But the room itself conspired against her. Every surface reflected her fragility. The marble floors seemed too slippery for her swollen feet. The chandeliers cast harsh light that made her exhaustion obvious. Even the orchestra's sweet symphony, violins, cellos, flutes, felt mocking, a soundtrack to her humiliation. And yet, hidden among the glittering crowd, another man's eyes followed her. From the corner table near the stage, Ethan Blackwood observed quietly. Unlike the others, he wasn't surrounded by sycophants or clinking glasses. He sat alone, his sharp suit perfectly cut, his posture commanding even in stillness. Ethan didn't need to chase attention. Attention gravitated to him. People whispered about him, but didn't dare approach. He saw what others refused to see. He saw Sophia's trembling hands, the way she bit her lip to hold back tears, the way David flaunted Vanessa without shame. His jaw tightened. Ethan knew cruelty when he saw it. And he had sworn long ago that if fate ever placed Sophia in front of him, he would not stay silent. But Sophia didn't know that. All she felt was the weight of the room pressing in on her. Every laugh from Vanessa, every smug glance from David, every flash of a camera, it was suffocating. She reached for a glass of wine on the tray of a passing waiter, not to drink, but to hold, to pretend she belonged. And that was when disaster struck. Her hand shook, just slightly, just enough. A drop of red splashed against David's pristine white sleeve. In an instant, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter died, the music faltered. 100 eyes turned, watching, waiting. David's smile froze on his lips. Slowly, he looked at her, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure rage. Sophia's stomach twisted. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible. But in this ballroom of wolves, sorry was weakness. David grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron, his smile returning only for the crowd. "Excuse us," he muttered, dragging her toward the center of the room. The orchestra stopped. The chandeliers seemed to dim. Every guest leaned forward, sensing scandal. Vanessa smirked, raising her glass of champagne. "Showtime," she whispered to the woman beside her. Sophia's heart pounded. She could feel every eye piercing her skin, every camera lens capturing her humiliation. She wanted to scream, to run, but David's grip was unrelenting. In the center of the ballroom, he shoved her to her knees. Gasps echoed across the hall. Sophia's hands flew to her belly instinctively, shielding the baby. David ripped the leather whip from the silent auction display. He raised it high. The first crack echoed through the ballroom like thunder. Guests froze. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was deafening. Sophia cried out, the pain ripping through her body like fire. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered desperately to the child inside her, "Hold on, baby. Please hold on." But David wasn't done. The whip cracked again and again. The gala had turned into a spectacle of cruelty. The chandeliers still glittered, the orchestra's instruments still gleamed, the champagne still fizzed in crystal flutes, but the room was no longer a temple of wealth. It was an arena. And at the edge of that arena, Ethan Blackwood rose to his feet, his eyes burning. What no one knew was that this gala, meant to celebrate power, was about to witness its greatest downfall. To understand the brutality of that night, one has to understand the man who wielded the whip. David Miller was not always a monster in Sophia's eyes. Once, he had been the man who made her laugh, who promised to protect her, who swore he would give her the world. But love has a cruel way of turning into something else, when power, greed, and pride poison the heart. David had built his identity on appearances. To his colleagues, he was the sharp investor with a silver tongue, the man who could close a deal over a glass of scotch and a handshake. To his neighbors, he was the perfect gentleman, smiling as he carried Sophia's grocery bags, waving at children on the block. And to strangers at the gala, he was the rising star of Wall Street, the man everyone wanted to know. But behind closed doors, the mask slipped. At home, David's charm rotted into cruelty. He snapped at Sophia for cooking meals too bland. He berated her for gaining weight during pregnancy, as if her swollen belly was an insult rather than a miracle. He controlled the bank accounts, the passwords, even the thermostat. To him, power wasn't enough unless it came with domination. And then there was Vanessa Cruz. Vanessa was everything David craved: young, flashy, hungry for attention. At 26, she was barely starting her career as a marketing associate in his firm, but she played her cards with ruthless precision. She laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. She leaned in close when speaking to him, brushing his arm, letting her perfume linger. She knew exactly what she was doing, and David, already restless in his marriage, was easy prey. It began with late-night work meetings, then business trips Sophia wasn't invited to, then whispers, rumors, photos of David arriving at events with a mysterious woman in red. When Sophia confronted him, he sneered, "You're paranoid. You're just hormonal." But Sophia wasn't paranoid. Vanessa had slid seamlessly into David's world, not as a secret but as an accessory. And unlike Sophia, Vanessa demanded nothing of him. No stability, no loyalty, no love. She wanted luxury, and David was eager to supply it. On the night of the gala, the two of them played their roles perfectly. David strutted like a king. Vanessa clung to him like a jewel. Every laugh, every whisper, every stolen glance was a dagger aimed at Sophia's heart. When Sophia spilled the wine, David saw more than an accident. He saw an opportunity. His entire life had been built on control. Now, in front of New York's elite, his pregnant wife had embarrassed him. A splash of wine on his sleeve was enough to ignite the firestorm brewing inside him. But it wasn't about the stain, it was about dominance. He needed to remind everyone, especially Sophia, who held the power. So he grabbed the whip. The cruelty of his act wasn't spontaneous, it was deliberate. David knew exactly what he was doing. Every lash wasn't just punishment. It was theater. With each strike, he sent a message to the crowd. This is what happens when you cross me. He relished the silence of the onlookers, their fear, their unwillingness to intervene. And Vanessa? She didn't flinch. She sipped her champagne as if watching a performance. Her smile widened with each lash. To her, Sophia's pain was entertainment, proof that she had replaced the wife not only in David's bed but in his world. Yet beneath her smirk, Vanessa's mind was calculating. She wasn't loyal to David any more than he was loyal to Sophia. She was loyal to ambition, to power. The moment David's empire cracked, she would abandon him without hesitation. But for now, she basked in the glow of borrowed influence. The crowd murmured in horror, but no one stepped forward. No one dared. David thrived on that fear. He loved the way people lowered their eyes, the way even the wealthiest men hesitated. It fed his ego, but he made a fatal mistake. In his arrogance, David forgot that not everyone in that room feared him. One man, standing at the edge of the ballroom, watched with eyes of steel. Ethan Blackwood. Ethan had lived long enough in the world of power to recognize a tyrant when he saw one. He had built his empire not through cruelty, but through strategy, through patience, through a code of honor that men like David could never comprehend. And as he watched Sophia suffer, as he saw the whip slice across her trembling body, something stirred inside him. This was no longer just about a woman being humiliated. It was about justice. David delivered the final lash, tossing the whip aside, his chest heaving. He looked down at Sophia with contempt, his voice dripping venom. "That's what happens when you make me look weak." The crowd was silent, suffocated by the weight of fear. But Ethan stepped forward. His footsteps echoed on the marble, steady and deliberate. Every head turned. David smirked when he saw him. "Blackwood," he sneered, brushing off his suit. "Come to join the show?" Ethan's gaze was like ice. "I didn't come to watch a man beat his pregnant wife," he said evenly. "I came to end it." The room gasped. Vanessa's smile faltered. David's smirk froze. For the first time that evening, the power in the room shifted. Not to David, not to Vanessa, but to Ethan Blackwood. Sophia, trembling on the floor, lifted her head just enough to meet Ethan's eyes. In them, she didn't see pity. She saw recognition, strength, a promise. David laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "End it? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Ethan stepped closer, towering over him. "Yes," he said coldly, "a coward." The crowd erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed. For the first time, David looked uncertain. Vanessa pulled at his arm, whispering, "Let's go." But David, blinded by pride, stood his ground. Ethan didn't flinch. His voice carried across the hall, firm and commanding. "Touch her again, Miller, and I'll destroy you in ways you can't even imagine." The ballroom was no longer a place of music and laughter. It was a battlefield. The violins lay silent. Champagne glasses sat untouched on tables. Every eye was locked on the confrontation unfolding in the center of the hall, between David Miller, the man who believed himself untouchable, and Ethan Blackwood, the billionaire who had just challenged him before an audience of hundreds. Sophia remained on the floor, her cheek pressed against the marble, her breath shallow, her arms cradling her belly as though her body alone could shield her unborn child. Pain radiated across her back, but another sensation cut through it. Disbelief. Someone had finally spoken up. After years of silence, after endless humiliation, someone had dared to defend her. David, however, was furious. His face twisted into a sneer as he straightened his tuxedo. "Coward?" he spat at Ethan. "You think you can walk into my life and insult me? This is my wife. She's mine to discipline." Gasps rippled across the crowd. Even in a room where power excused nearly everything, David's words crossed a line. Whispers surged like a current. Did he just say that? He's insane. In front of the cameras? Ethan didn't flinch. His voice cut through the murmurs, calm but lethal. "She's not property. She's not yours to break." He stepped closer, his towering presence swallowing the space between them. "She's a human being, a mother. And tonight, you've shown the world what kind of man you truly are." Cameras flashed. The press smelled blood. This was no longer just a gala. This was a scandal unfolding in real time, and every photograph would be tomorrow's headline. David realized it too. He turned, scanning the faces of investors, politicians, and board members, people he depended on for his fragile empire. Their expressions weren't admiration. They were horror, disgust, revulsion. He could feel the empire he had built teetering on the edge of collapse. Panic flickered behind his eyes, but pride was stronger. He grabbed Sophia by the arm, yanking her upright. She stumbled, her body weak, her breath ragged. The crowd gasped again as she cried out in pain. "See?" David barked, his voice cracking. "She's fine. She needs discipline, not pity." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. For the first time, her smirk faltered. She could feel the crowd's judgment burning into her as well. Being David's arm candy was one thing. Being complicit in his brutality was another. Her perfectly painted smile trembled, but she clung to his arm anyway, unwilling to abandon him yet. Ethan's eyes darkened. He stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "Let go of her." David laughed, though it sounded forced. "Or what? You'll write a check? You think money makes you powerful?" He shoved Sophia toward the crowd, her body collapsing once more against the floor. "This is my life, Blackwood, not yours." But the words didn't land the way he wanted. The crowd didn't see strength. They saw weakness. They saw desperation. And they saw Ethan Blackwood standing tall, unshaken, commanding the room with nothing more than presence. Sophia lifted her head, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the chandeliers. For years, she had been silenced. But tonight, with cameras clicking and eyes watching, something inside her cracked open. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling but audible in the hushed room. "You're not a husband. You're a monster." The words hung in the air like lightning. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, shocked exclamations. For the first time, Sophia had spoken against him in public. For the first time, she had refused to cower. David's face turned crimson. He lunged at her, hand raised. But before he could strike, Ethan caught his wrist midair. The impact echoed like a gunshot, the billionaire's grip unyielding. "Enough," Ethan growled. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of authority. The kind that silences men. The kind that ends careers. David struggled, but Ethan's hand didn't move. The room watched, mesmerized. This was no longer about money or status. It was about strength of character. And David had none. Ethan shoved him back. David stumbled, his composure unraveling. He looked around for support, for validation, but found only cold stares. Even Vanessa's grip loosened on his arm. The investors who once toasted him now turned their faces away. Sophia, still trembling, tried to rise. Ethan extended his hand. For a moment, hesitation flickered in her eyes. But then she took it, and the ballroom erupted again. Cameras flashed like fireworks as the billionaire helped the broken wife to her feet. It was a picture that would appear on every front page by morning. The tyrant exposed, the victim supported, the savior revealed. David knew it. His empire was crumbling in real time. Rage burned in his chest, but he couldn't fight it. Not here, not now. So he turned to Vanessa, desperate for validation. "Tell them," he demanded. "Tell them I'm right. Tell them she deserved it." Vanessa froze. Her painted lips parted, but no words came. She looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at Ethan's piercing gaze. And then she did what David never expected. She stepped back. Her silence was louder than any accusation. She chose her image over loyalty, her ambition over love. She left David standing alone, humiliated, abandoned. The ballroom buzzed with whispers. "She's leaving him? He's finished. This will ruin him." Sophia clutched Ethan's arm, her body shaking. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't only from pain. For the first time she felt the faintest glimpse of something she hadn't known in years. Hope. David, trembling with rage, shouted over the crowd. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, Sophia. You'll regret it, Blackwood." But his threats fell flat. No one believed him anymore. The orchestra stood frozen, the waiters paused mid-step, the chandeliers glittered above, but the power in the room had shifted forever. And as security began to move in, as whispers of lawsuits and headlines spread, Ethan leaned close to Sophia, his voice low, steady, protective. "You're safe now." But Sophia knew it wasn't over. Not yet, because David Miller was a man who would rather burn his world to the ground than accept defeat. And he wasn't finished with her. The gala ended in chaos. Security escorted David out of the ballroom, his protests echoing down the marble hallways like the shouts of a desperate man drowning. Vanessa slipped away through a side exit, leaving him to face his humiliation alone. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes darting between Sophia, frail, trembling, leaning against Ethan for support, and the door through which David disappeared. By the time the cameras stopped flashing and the reporters dispersed, Sophia's body felt broken. Every muscle ached, her back throbbed, and her swollen belly cramped with a dull ache that filled her with terror. She pressed her palm against her stomach again and again, silently begging her baby to stay safe. Ethan insisted on driving her home. His black limousine glided through the city streets, silent except for the hum of the engine. Sophia sat curled against the leather seat, staring out the tinted window, her reflection pale and ghostly in the glass. "Do you need a hospital?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but concerned. She shook her head. "No hospital. If word gets out..." Her voice cracked. "I can't let him take this baby from me." Ethan didn't push, though his jaw tightened. He knew fear when he heard it, and hers was bone deep. When the car pulled up to her apartment building, Sophia hesitated. The thought of walking into that place, a home filled with David's cologne, his shadow, his rage, made her stomach churn. But she had nowhere else to go. She thanked Ethan with a broken whisper and forced herself inside. The apartment was dark and cold. Every corner carried memories of her humiliation. The sofa where David had once laughed with her was now just the place he sat texting Vanessa. The kitchen table where they once ate takeout together was where he had thrown plates in anger. The nursery, still unfinished, mocked her with half-built furniture and unopened boxes of diapers. Sophia collapsed on the floor of the nursery, her body shaking with sobs. She pressed both hands to her stomach. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Her tears fell freely. For years she had held them back, swallowing her pain, convincing herself that endurance was strength. But now the dam broke. The sobs were raw, guttural, filling the empty apartment like a confession she had never allowed herself to speak. She cried for the girl she used to be, the hopeful nurse who believed in forever. She cried for the woman she had become, the prisoner of a cruel man's pride. And most of all, she cried for the child inside her, the innocent life tied to the storm of a toxic marriage. Hours passed. She stayed curled on the floor until the city outside shifted from night to dawn. Light filtered through the blinds, illuminating her tear-streaked face. Her body felt heavy, her mind foggy. And then came the pounding at the door. Sophia's heart seized, her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she forced herself to her feet and staggered toward the door. "Open up, Sophia." David's voice thundered through the wood. Terror shot through her. She froze, clutching her belly. He had been escorted out of the gala, humiliated before hundreds. He should have been hiding. But David wasn't the kind of man to hide. He was the kind who struck back twice as hard. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "You made a fool of me in front of everyone. You think you can embarrass me and get away with it?" His fist slammed against the door again. "You're mine, Sophia. Do you hear me? Mine." Sophia's body trembled violently. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. She stumbled back from the door, whispering to her baby, "Stay calm, please stay calm." Then silence. The pounding stopped. His voice faded. For a moment, she thought he had gone. She crept toward the peephole. The hallway was empty. Relief flooded her, but only briefly. Because when she turned around, she saw something on the floor beneath the door. A slip of paper. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was a note, scribbled in David's angry handwriting. "If you think tonight was bad, wait until I'm finished with you." Sophia's knees buckled. She sank to the floor, clutching the note, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The despair was overwhelming. How could she fight him? He had the money, the power, the rage. She had nothing but her unborn child and a body covered in bruises. For the first time she thought about running, leaving the city, vanishing. But where could she go with no money, no support, no protection? As the sun rose higher, she forced herself to the couch. Her body begged for rest, but her mind refused to quiet. Every sound outside, the slam of a car door, the echo of footsteps, sent her heart racing. Fear sat heavy in her chest, crushing her with every breath. By evening, exhaustion won. She drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with flashes of David's sneer, Vanessa's mocking laughter, the whip cracking across her back. But in the darkest hours of the night, when she woke gasping from another nightmare, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her heart racing. A message glowed on the screen from an unknown number. "You don't have to face him alone. I can help you. E.B. Ethan Blackwood." Sophia's hand shook as she read the message over and over. She didn't know whether to feel relief or suspicion. Why would a billionaire involve himself in her nightmare? Why would a man like him care about a woman like her? And yet, she remembered the way he looked at her in the ballroom. Not like she was broken, not like she was weak, but like she was someone worth saving. Her heart pounded as she typed a single reply, "Why?" For a moment, there was no response. Then the screen lit up again. "Because I owe your family a debt, and it's time I repaid it." Sophia's breath caught. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind, but one truth cut through them all. Her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Sophia stared at the message glowing on her phone screen. "Because I owe your family a debt, and it's time I repaid it." Her hands trembled. She read the words again and again, trying to make sense of them. Her family? What debt? She barely had enough strength to keep herself together. And now this billionaire, the man who had stood up to David in front of an entire ballroom, was claiming some mysterious connection to her past. Her first instinct was suspicion. David had trained her to doubt, to second-guess herself, to question every kindness. What if this was another trap? What if Ethan was no different from David? Just another powerful man who saw her as a pawn. But another part of her, the part that still remembered what hope felt like, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was real. She typed a shaky reply. "What debt?" The response came quickly. "Not here. Meet me tomorrow. 10 a.m. The Blackwood Building. You'll understand everything then." Sophia's breath caught. The Blackwood Building was one of the tallest skyscrapers in Manhattan, a monument to Ethan's empire. The idea of walking into it terrified her. She wasn't used to places like that anymore. Marble lobbies, glass elevators, men in suits speaking the language of billions. She was a nurse, a wife, a woman broken by 7 months of abuse. She didn't belong in his world. But she also couldn't ignore the message. Not when David had left a threat under her door. Not when she felt more alone than she had ever been. That night, she barely slept. When dawn came, she dressed in her simplest maternity dress and pulled her hair back. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Tired eyes, pale skin, bruises faintly visible beneath her collar. But she forced herself to stand tall. She was going to find out the truth. The Blackwood Building towered over the city like a fortress. As Sophia stepped through the revolving doors, the marble lobby seemed to swallow her whole. A receptionist looked up, her smile polite but professional. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." Her heart stuttered. She hadn't even given her name. Ethan already knew she would come. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. When the doors finally opened, Sophia stepped into an office that looked more like a palace than a workplace. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the sprawl of New York below. The walls were lined with dark wood and shelves of leather-bound books. And at the center, behind a massive desk, stood Ethan Blackwood. He wasn't wearing the tuxedo from the gala. Today it was a simple gray suit, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. But even dressed down, he radiated authority. His presence filled the room. "Sophia," he said softly, stepping forward. "I'm glad you came." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Why am I here? What do you mean? You owe my family a debt." Ethan's gaze held hers. There was no hesitation, no calculation, only truth. 30 years ago, he began. I was a boy in Pennsylvania. My father had just lost everything in a bad investment. We were living in our car, hungry, cold. One night, I collapsed on the side of the road. Sophia's chest tightened. Pennsylvania. A man stopped his truck when he saw me, Ethan continued. He gave me food. He gave me blankets. He took me and my father in for a few nights. That man was your father, John Carter. Sophia's breath hitched. Her knees felt weak. My dad? Ethan nodded. Your father saved my life. Without him, I wouldn't be here. He never asked for anything in return. He just told me to grow up and be a good man. I swore to myself that one day, if I ever had the chance, I would repay him. I've been waiting for that chance. And now, it's you. Tears blurred Sophia's vision. She remembered her father, his calloused hands, his quiet laugh, the way he worked long hours at the mechanic shop just to keep food on the table. She remembered his constant reminders, do good, even when no one's watching. And now she understood. The kindness her father had given freely had come back to her in the most unexpected way. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything, Ethan said gently. You've been carrying this alone for too long. I won't let David hurt you again. You have my protection. Sophia shook her head, fear clashing with hope. You don't understand. David won't stop. He'll come after me. He'll take the baby if he can. Ethan's expression hardened. Then he'll have to go through me. Sophia's tears spilled over. No one had ever said those words to her before. No one had ever promised to stand between her and the storm. But even as hope flickered, fear returned. If you help me, David will come for you too. He doesn't care who he destroys. Ethan stepped closer. Sophia, I've faced men far worse than David Miller. I'm not afraid of him. For the first time, Sophia allowed herself to breathe, to believe. But just as relief washed over her, Ethan's phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up, his face darkening as he read the message. What is it? Sophia asked nervously. Ethan looked up, his jaw tight. It's David. Her stomach dropped. What did he do? Ethan handed her the phone. The message was short, chilling. If you think you can steal my wife and my child, Blackwood, you're dead wrong. This isn't over. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Her hand shook as she clutched the phone. David wasn't finished. He was planning something. Ethan's eyes locked on hers, filled with a determination she had never seen before. Sophia, he said gravely, you're not safe here. We need to move you tonight. When Ethan Blackwood told Sophia they needed to move her that night, she felt her world tilt again. For weeks, her life had been a blur of pain, fear, and humiliation. Now, in the middle of his towering office, she was being asked to leave everything behind. Her apartment, her memories, the life she had once fought to protect. At first, panic struck. I can't just disappear, she whispered, her voice trembling. David will know. He'll find me. Ethan's tone was steady, unshakable. Let him try. I've already arranged a safe house. My security team will take you there tonight. He won't touch you again. Sophia pressed her hands against her belly. The baby shifted inside her, a reminder that every decision she made wasn't just for herself. She nodded slowly, her tears falling silently. By midnight, she was escorted into a sleek black SUV. The city lights blurred past as Ethan's security detail drove her through Manhattan, away from the life she had known. When the car finally stopped, Sophia found herself in front of a sprawling townhouse tucked behind ivy-covered gates. It wasn't ostentatious like David's world, but it radiated safety, warmth. Inside, she was met by a team of women Ethan had arranged, a private nurse, a counselor, and a stylist who brought her new clothes. Sophia felt overwhelmed. For so long, she'd been denied even the smallest kindness. Now strangers were offering her care without judgment. At first, she resisted. When the stylist laid out elegant maternity dresses and soft silk robes, Sophia shook her head. "I'm not that kind of woman. I don't belong in things like this." The stylist smiled gently. "You belong in anything that makes you feel strong." The words lingered. For days, Sophia slept, ate, and allowed her body to heal. The bruises faded, the swelling eased. Slowly, she began to recognize herself in the mirror. Not the broken wife who flinched at every sound, but the woman she had been before David. Kind, resilient, brave. One morning, she stood before the mirror in a new gown, emerald green, flowing gently over her 7-month belly. For the first time in years, she didn't see a victim. She saw a mother, a survivor. Her counselor asked her, "Sophia, what do you want your child to see when they look at you one day?" The question cut deep. Sophia thought of the baby inside her, of the eyes that would soon look up at her for guidance. She whispered, "I want them to see strength. I want them to see that I didn't give up." From that moment, something shifted. She began to speak with more confidence. She walked straighter, no longer curling inward in shame. She ate healthy meals and practiced gentle stretches with the nurse's guidance. With every passing day, she wasn't just surviving, she was reclaiming herself. And Ethan noticed. One evening, he visited the townhouse, finding her in the library with a book in her lap. She looked up at him, her eyes brighter than he had ever seen. "You're changing," he said softly. Sophia nodded. "I thought I was broken. But maybe I just needed someone to remind me that I wasn't." Ethan studied her for a moment, something unspoken in his eyes. "You were never broken, Sophia. You were just hidden under his cruelty." Her chest tightened. For years she had believed David's words, that she was weak, useless, pathetic. Now, hearing Ethan tell her otherwise felt like oxygen filling her lungs. But transformation wasn't just emotional, it became visible. A week later, Ethan arranged for Sophia to attend a small charity luncheon, not a grand gala like before, but a quiet event with trusted allies. At first, Sophia resisted. "I can't face people again, not after what happened," but Ethan was firm. "You can, and you must, because the world needs to see you're not afraid anymore." So she went. When Sophia entered the room, wearing her emerald gown and standing tall, whispers spread. These were the same circles that had witnessed her humiliation at the gala. Many expected her to shrink, to hide. Instead, she met their eyes head-on. One woman approached her timidly. "Mrs. Miller, I just wanted to say, what your husband did was unforgivable. But the way you're standing here today, it's inspiring." Tears pricked Sophia's eyes, but she smiled. For the first time, admiration replaced pity. The luncheon ended with applause when she shared a few words. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew stronger. "I may have been beaten, but I am not broken. I will fight for myself and for my child. No woman should ever have to endure what I endured. And tonight, I choose to rise." The crowd erupted. Cameras clicked. This time, Sophia wasn't the victim of a scandal. She was the face of resilience. But while Sophia's strength grew, David's fury boiled. In his penthouse, David watched news clips of the luncheon, his face contorting with rage. "She thinks she can humiliate me? She thinks she can rise without me?" He hurled a glass against the wall, shards scattering across the marble. Vanessa, sitting nearby, rolled her eyes. "You're finished, David. She doesn't need you anymore." He grabbed her wrist, his voice venomous. "Don't you dare walk away from me too." But Vanessa only laughed coldly. "You're not worth the ruin you bring. Find someone else to worship you." She stood, leaving him alone in the wreckage of his pride. David's chest heaved. His empire was crumbling. His wife was rising from the ashes. And now, even his mistress was gone. His voice was a low growl as he whispered to himself, "If I can't have her, no one will." Meanwhile, back at the townhouse, Sophia received a sealed envelope slipped under her door. Her heart skipped as she unfolded the paper. Inside was a single photograph, her standing at the luncheon, smiling, radiant. Across the image, scrawled in angry red ink, were 3 chilling words: "I'm watching you." The photograph with the words "I'm watching you" haunted Sophia for days. Each night she lay awake in the townhouse, her hand over her belly, listening for footsteps that never came. The note was David's calling card, a promise that he wouldn't stop until he regained control. But what David hadn't counted on was Sophia's transformation. She was no longer the silent wife cowering in the shadows. With Ethan's protection and with the fire of survival burning inside her, she was ready not just to defend herself, but to strike back. And she wouldn't do it quietly. Ethan's legal team had been working around the clock, gathering evidence of David's abuse, medical records of Sophia's bruises, witness statements from neighbors who had overheard fights, financial records proving his infidelity and misuse of marital assets, even leaked photos of him parading Vanessa at company events while Sophia was bedridden with pregnancy. Piece by piece, they built a case that would not only end his career, but strip him of every ounce of credibility. Still, Sophia hesitated. "If I take him to court," she whispered to Ethan one evening, "he'll come after me harder." Ethan's gaze was steady. "That's exactly why you need to take him to court. You don't just need protection, Sophia. You need justice. And once the world knows the truth, he won't have the power to hurt you anymore." Sophia's heart pounded. For years, David had silenced her with fear. But now she had something stronger than fear. Proof. The court date was set. The story exploded across the media even before the trial began. Headlines screamed, "Investment mogul accused of brutal abuse. Pregnant wife breaks silence. Billionaire Blackwood to testify." David raged in his penthouse, throwing furniture, threatening anyone who dared to question him. But no matter how he spun it, the tide had turned. Investors pulled out of his company. Board members resigned. Vanessa vanished, aligning herself with another wealthy executive, leaving David abandoned and furious. The day of the trial arrived. The courthouse steps overflowed with reporters, their cameras flashing as Sophia arrived, dressed in a simple navy dress that highlighted her strength rather than her pain. She walked slowly, her 7-month belly leading the way, her hand gripping Ethan's arm for support. She looked fragile, but her eyes burned with determination. David arrived minutes later, his once perfect suit wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He barked at reporters, insisting it was all lies, that Sophia was being manipulated. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They shouted questions, accusations, demands for answers. For the first time, David wasn't commanding respect. He was drowning in scorn. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. The judge, a stern woman with decades of experience, watched silently as the trial began. Sophia took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew steadier as she recounted the years of control, the cruel words, the humiliation, and finally the gala. The room was silent as she described the whip, the lashes, the fear of losing her baby. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to break. Then Ethan testified. His voice carried authority, recounting what he had witnessed at the gala. His words painted David as not just a cruel husband, but a man unworthy of trust, a man who had abused power both at home and in public. "No amount of wealth," Ethan said firmly, "gives a man the right to destroy another human being." The defense tried to smear Sophia. They called her dramatic, unstable, hormonal. They suggested she was exaggerating. But when the photographs of her bruises were displayed on the courtroom screens, the lies crumbled. Gasps echoed through the room as the images told a story no words could deny. And then came the final blow. One of David's own employees testified, revealing that Vanessa had bragged about replacing Sophia, laughing about David's cruelty as if it were entertainment. The betrayal was undeniable. David wasn't just abusive, he was shameless. By the end of the trial, the verdict was inevitable. The judge's gavel struck. David Miller was found guilty of domestic abuse and financial misconduct. He was stripped of his position in his company, ordered to pay damages, and barred from contacting Sophia again. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters rushed to file breaking news. And Sophia, tears streaming, clutched her belly and whispered a single word: "Free." But the victory wasn't just legal, it was public. That night, television screens across America replayed footage of Sophia standing tall outside the courthouse, Ethan by her side. News anchors praised her bravery. Social media overflowed with messages of support. Sophia is a hero. Justice for survivors. No woman should suffer in silence. For the first time in years, Sophia wasn't invisible. She was a symbol. David, meanwhile, sat in a holding cell, his empire reduced to ashes. His phone buzzed with messages he could no longer answer. His investors abandoned him. His mistress had betrayed him. His wife had destroyed him in court. And yet, as he sat in the darkness, a twisted smile crept across his face. Because David Miller was not a man who accepted defeat. And as Sophia left the courthouse, surrounded by supporters, holding Ethan's hand with tears of relief in her eyes, she couldn't shake the chill that ran down her spine when she remembered his last words before the verdict was read. "This isn't over, Sophia. Not until one of us is gone." The courthouse doors closed behind Sophia Miller, and with them, a chapter of her life slammed shut. The roar of reporters and flashing cameras faded as Ethan guided her down the courthouse steps. For the first time in 7 years, she was no longer bound by David Miller's shadow. But freedom, Sophia soon realized, didn't feel like fireworks or parades. It felt quiet. It felt like taking a deep breath after nearly drowning. It felt like possibility. That evening, Sophia sat in the safe house, her hands cradling her swollen belly. The verdict echoed in her mind. David Miller, guilty of domestic abuse and financial misconduct. She whispered softly, "We're safe now, baby. We're finally safe." The relief washed over her, but so did exhaustion. Healing wasn't instantaneous. The bruises on her body would fade, but the scars on her heart ran deep. Some nights she still woke up gasping, hearing phantom echoes of David's voice. Some mornings she hesitated before opening the curtains, afraid he might be watching. But every day those fears weakened. Every day, Sophia grew stronger. With Ethan's help, she began attending support groups for women who had survived abuse. At first, she sat in silence, listening to others share stories that mirrored her own, stories of fear, control, violence, and survival. Slowly, she found her voice among them. "I thought I was weak," she confessed one evening, her hands trembling. "But I wasn't weak. I was scared. And fear isn't weakness. Surviving isn't weakness." The room filled with nods and tears. Sophia realized she wasn't alone anymore. Her pregnancy, too, became a source of strength rather than fear. Each kick, each flutter, reminded her why she had fought so hard. She began preparing the nursery at the safe house, painting the walls a soft yellow, folding tiny clothes into drawers. For the first time, she wasn't haunted by unfinished cribs or broken promises. She was building a future on her own terms. And Ethan, always steady, always near, became more than just her protector. He became her anchor. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply showed up. Dinners shared at the townhouse, walks through the quiet garden when she couldn't sleep, a steady hand offered when she felt unsteady. One evening, as they stood by the window overlooking the city, Sophia whispered, "Why are you doing all this for me?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Because your father saved me when I was helpless. And now, I have the chance to honor that gift by saving you." He paused, his voice lower, gentler. "But it's not just about repaying a debt anymore. It's about you. Because you deserve more than survival, Sophia. You deserve to live." Her eyes filled with tears. For years, she had been told she was worthless. Now, for the first time, she believed she was worth everything. 2 months later, Sophia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The delivery was long, exhausting, but when she held her son against her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks, she felt a joy so fierce it burned away every shadow of her past. She named him Leo, after her father's middle name, honoring the man whose kindness had saved both her and Ethan decades apart. Ethan visited the hospital, standing quietly at her bedside. When he looked at Leo, his usually guarded expression softened. "He's strong," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion, just like his mother. In the weeks that followed, Sophia's story spread across the country. News outlets hailed her as a symbol of resilience. Women reached out from across the world, thanking her for speaking out, for showing that even in the darkest circumstances, there was a path to freedom. David, meanwhile, languished in prison. His empire dissolved, his name tarnished. Vanessa had already moved on, attaching herself to another wealthy man, leaving David with nothing but bitterness. He had lost everything, his power, his fortune, his wife, his child. Sophia didn't celebrate his downfall. She didn't need revenge anymore. She had something far greater, peace. Months later, Sophia stood on a stage at a charity gala, not as a humiliated wife, but as the keynote speaker. Her emerald gown shimmered under the lights, her hair loose and radiant. Ethan sat in the audience, his eyes steady on her as she spoke. "I once believed silence was survival," Sophia began, her voice carrying across the room. "I thought if I endured, if I stayed quiet, things would get better. But silence doesn't protect us. Speaking out does. Tonight, I stand here not as a victim, but as a mother, a survivor, and a woman who refuses to be broken. To every woman out there, you are stronger than you think, and you are never alone. The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed, but this time, Sophia welcomed the attention. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a voice, a force, a light. Afterward, Ethan approached her, his expression unreadable. "You've changed everything tonight," he said softly. Sophia smiled, tears in her eyes. "No, I just finally remembered who I was meant to be." The two stood together, watching as guests lined up to pledge donations to causes supporting survivors. Sophia felt Leo's tiny hand gripping hers, her son's warmth anchoring her to the future. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to dream, not of survival, not of escape, but of happiness. David's shadow was gone, the chains were broken, and Sophia Miller, once beaten, silenced, forgotten, was reborn. Because when a woman rises from the ashes, she doesn't just survive, she soars. So that's how Sophia's story ends. But maybe you're still here with me right now, listening until the very last word. If you are, it means something touched you. It means a part of this story spoke to your own heart. And maybe that's the real lesson. No matter how heavy the suffering, there is always a way to rise again. As the Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. Pain can break us, but it can also shape us into someone stronger. If this story moved you, my dear friends, don't just keep it inside. Share it, like it, and subscribe so we can walk through more journeys of courage together. Because healing begins the moment we realize we are never truly alone.